This is the Bloomberg Advantage with Cory Johnson and Carol Massar on Bloomberg Radio.
I'm only human, a flesh and blood.
Well, our next guest says CEOs must demand more from their human resources function. He ought to know something about that. He is vice chairman at the executive search firm Korn, Ferry. We're talking about Alan Guarino. He is back with us in our Bloomberg 1130 studio. Nice to have you back with us.
Hi, Carol. Glad to be back.
I feel like I have a laundry list of things I want to talk to you about. First up, I want to ask you about Brexit.
Is that how it always goes when you sit down with the HR person? You got a laundry list. Start with this thing Cory said.
Yes, exactly. Cory. Alan, Brexit, you were there in London on the day of the vote. You deal with, firms and their hiring plans. How has what happened, the outcome in the UK, maybe changed hiring plans for those firms, specifically those who are operating over in the UK?
Well, it's interesting because when I was there, the predictions were, this great catastrophe. Because again, I was in the city, which is where the financial markets are headquartered. And so people were predicting gloom and doom, and then arrived back in the States and saw the results of the vote the next day.
Shocking.
And people were shocked. And the texts and notes I was getting from financial markets people on the ground there were, very, very alarming. What I think we've all learned is that it's going to take some time, right? I think the way that the whole thing will play out is really around what the EU enables the City of London to continue to do when it comes to financial markets.
And passporting, is that what they call it?
The passport's the key. If the passport can't be negotiated in some way, shape, or form, then places like Dublin and Frankfurt look interesting. But the practical point that was brought out to me is it took a decade to build Canary Wharf. And you don't just move people by snapping fingers and having real estate and property and infrastructure magically appear in places like Dublin or Frankfurt, not to mention language issues that might be relevant too.
And we do have folks like, JP Morgan Chase's CEO, Jamie Dimon, already coming out and warning and saying he may relocate a few thousand of his employees from the UK.
Yeah, Jamie said that a few days before the vote. And they all have to, because the fact of the matter is they've got to be able to trade foreign exchange. And I think I'm not an expert in the legalities of the EU structure, but I think it's pretty simple that they have to clear through a UK headquartered, through a European Union headquartered location. That's part of the way that
it's just
treaty
the
set
rules.
up. Yes,
it's just
exactly.
the rules.
And you said it, but I feel like these companies can move quick. Or let me rephrase it: the growth and the margin is what drives value, right, or valuation. The belief that there's another bidder, the belief that prices are going to change. What do they call in the oil markets? Is it contango? With the idea that prices are going to get higher, so you better bid now, you better buy now.
Right.
That's what drives the economy to some degree. And that with the notion that contraction's coming, and again, oil and gas would be backwardization, the notion that prices are going to be lower going forward, it makes that happen instantly, even if the activity takes longer.
In terms of the real estate move?
In terms of real estate move, in terms of people starting to figure out where they're going to be and what their future holds, but as employers or employees.
Oh, Cory, there's massive planning. You're absolutely right. There's massive planning going on, but it's planning in the face of complete and total ambiguity. So
because we don't know.
It's contingency planning. It's a lot. It reminds me a lot like my time in the Army. It's you plan for various scenarios, and then when it becomes clear, then you deploy that particular plan.
Let me ask you about something else that's in the news, and then I want to get into the human resources aspect of why we wanted to bring you in. Citadel, which is a firm run by Ken Griffin. You've done some work with him. So he hired Kevin Turner, the chief operating officer at Microsoft, to run its securities unit. At first, I think I was like, what? But finance firms are increasingly technology firms.
Sure. I kind of felt good when I saw the announcement today, because 8 years ago, a colleague and I were in the boardroom of a very big financial markets company, and we talked about succession for that CEO. And I walked around the room and said to the board, if something were to happen tomorrow, where would the new CEO come from? And the names of the places started to crop up, like Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, and so on. And then we said, well, in the concept of planning for the future, in 5 or 6 years, where would the CEO come from? And we went around the room, and the board basically had the same answer. And when they finished, I looked at them and said, I'm surprised you didn't say Microsoft. And half the board laughed. And the other half looked at me and said, oh, yeah, wow.
Right.
Didn't think of it that way. So Ken Griffin's brilliant. I had the chance to work with Ken when he was involved on the board of directors of a company, and I had the privilege of really interacting with him. And it's no surprise that he would do, in my view, he would do something like this, and I think it's brilliant. He's been one of the pioneers in investing and supporting the electronification of trading. He's built powerful electronic market making capabilities. He's very forward thinking.
That's interesting. So it sounds like you've worked with him in an HR role as well.
I worked with him when he was on a public company board, and we were assisting that board in recruiting board members and reestablishing an approach to board governance.
So perfect segue then. I mean, the role of what HR people do gets a lot bigger than even that recruiting level, it seems like, in kind of planning business activities, it seems like these days.
No question, Cory. We're at a point, and I'm happy to still have maybe 10 years left in my career, where talent is today where technology was 30 years ago in terms of strategic priority. And it's kind of funny. We've always said, talent's our most important resource, right? And then we didn't walk that talk. Now it's clear to CEOs, and I think the first time in many years, that it's the number one concern that they articulate on the Corporate Executive Board survey. It's usually in the top 4, but talent is their number one concern. So what that basically says is, well, who is the talent strategy and operational owner within the C-suite? And that owner is the chief HR officer. And so they are now having the opportunity to contemplate how HR needs to function, with HR as an absolutely critical strategic component to the business, which unfortunately has been treated much more like an administrative function than a strategic function.
I feel like HR has always been like, okay, that's where the problems go, rather than that's where we get maybe strategy from.
Exactly. And it's been talked about for over a decade, this notion of strategic HR, but it's not been acted upon. So I think there are some real opportunities for them to act upon it, but it's going to take some bold cultural transformation, and the HR industry itself. Those folks are going to have to step up to a new job type.
But kind of important. If you think about like what you said, was it the financial firm, thinking about a Microsoft or technology executive. I mean, it really does it requires some forward thinking.
Absolutely.
All right, we got to run. Hey, thank you.
Thanks for having me.
This is fun. Look forward to it again.
Take care.
Alan Guarino, Vice Chairman at Korn Ferry, joining us in our Bloomberg 1130 studio. Coming up, we're going to dig a little bit into the jobs report. Of course, that will be the focal point for markets tomorrow. You're listening to the Bloomberg Advantage. Carol Massar, Cory Johnson. This is Bloomberg.